Well, good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining me this evening. I can claim two connections with Dulwich and the silver screen. The first one dates back to 1945 when I joined the Odeon Club at the Odeon East Dulwich. And I was in the Odeon Club for 3 years until I went to Alleynes and had to do school on on a Saturday morning. But other than that, I was religiously a member going on a Saturday morning down to uh, Grove Vale. And I remember especially when it was my birthday that you got a special card and you went to the front of the queue. And so that was great. Um, the other connection I had was that I served in the army with Oliver Reed. And as I had rather more stripes than he did, he was my minion for about a month or two. Anyway, now the present. It just surprised me when I started to look at this topic. Um, the actual breadth of the connection of the screen and the actors with Dulwich. Um, it occurred to me as I was doing this that actors um, would often went into the business because they had a mother that was pressing them to go to learn the piano, to learn to dance, or to go to stage school. And it was the father generally who put his hand in his pocket to pay those fees. There was another method, which was to actually be one of those extremely brilliant actors that would win one of the 29 places at RADA per year out of the 3,600 applicants. And the fact that a number of Dulwich people actually went to RADA is really commendable. But of course, good news is that other universities have now got drama and dance degrees, and so that's marvelous. There was a third avenue to actually becoming an actor, and that occurred in 1956. So we're going to listen to a little bit more about that later. But it was when the National Youth Theatre was founded, and it was as it was founded in Dulwich at Alleynes School, or rather by some of the pupils at Alleynes School, and some of those I still meet. That was a significant moment because today it's still a good avenue for the sort of 16 to 18-year-olds to actually go into the National Youth Theatre. So here we go, Dulwich and the Silver Screen. Well, it starts in 1904 when Gaumont, which was a French company, decided they were going to expand, and they only sort of started in about the 1880s, and it was rather an amateurish way at first. But anyway, they really got their act together, and they expanded into the United Kingdom, and they got an agent, and the agent started up first of all at Loughborough Junction, but then he moved to what is now the Sainsbury's actual site next to Dog Kennel Hill. That's where the first Gaumont studio was. And the man that actually was the agent his name was Broomhead. But Broomhead delegated most of his work to Alf Collins, who you see here on the left, who was brought up in the music hall. His father was a music hall performer. His brother was a composer of things like boiled beef and carrots. That was one of the ones he composed. Two of his sisters were in the act as well, and Alf Collins, remained in the music hall tradition until the 1950s. And so Alf Collins, when he started actually with films, his job was to sort of be like an usher, if you like. He would organize the crowd scenes, the chases, and he became the manager. He was also the producer, director, and as we see here, the performer. So this is a picture of him ready to go, actually, where the Sainsbury's car park is on Dog Kennel Hill. And here is the little movie, which we're very grateful to Tony Fletcher of the Cinema Museum, who has had the BFI actually restore these old paper films actually to with modern technique to very watchable movies. So here we go, and it is we go. And so Alf Collins is dressed there, and it is a competition. And he's won the competition, as you can see. The rest of the contestants of this beauty competition are a bit fed up. They descend the stairs of what is in fact the cricket pavilion. And they used the sunlight. They had no special lighting. So they used sunlight. And it was a south-facing, of course, a south-facing slope. So he's unmasked. Alf is unmasked. He runs across. Watch out for the sheep in a moment. All of those ladies are extras. They were paid about sixpence, I think. Some of them were also his relatives. Falling over was part of the act, of course. And they're all chases. And here you see where, when he climbed over, he then climbs over the fence and is running up. This is Greendale. And if you look at the sign there, you can see St. Olives, it says. And that is the St. Olives and St. Saviour's sports ground. If you walk up Greendale from Jags, on your right-hand side, you're going to see the fence, a fence, and you're going to see the sign. That's where Alf Collins, he made dozens of pictures in this area, in this studio. Move on now to Stanley Watkins. Stanley Watkins was a neighbour of mine when he retired. He died in 1975, but my wife and I moved into Burbage Road in 1971. So we knew Stanley for 4 years. Stanley was a brilliant scientist. He went to Imperial College, as you see, in 1908. He had some relatives that were living in America, and they were in California and running a lemon ranch. Anyway, Stanley goes out to California to the lemon ranch. He does some time there, goes back, and then he does his BSc at Imperial, and he's looking for a job. And in the meantime, his relatives in California had moved to New York, and they were in contact rather, with someone working for Western Electrical. Now, Western Electrical were actually in Chicago, but Western Electric moved from Chicago down to New York. So Stanley Watkins' uncle said to Stanley, wrote to Stanley, why don't you come out here? Maybe there's something at Western. So Stanley goes to New York. He's accepted by Western Electric, and his speciality is sound, synchronizing of sound, loudspeakers, and so on. Before very long, the World War I starts, and Stan is then put on things for defense, the Defense Department, and that scientific investigations into gun ranging, anti-submarine and anti-aircraft development. But it's the sound, so it's the sound of the submarines, and it is to improve the actual loudspeakers and the receivers as well. In the process of this, he also becomes pretty expert on providing hearing aids. So that was another thing that happened to him. After the end of the war, he started to install sound equipment in concert halls and theatres, and that included the Roxy Cinema in New York, which held 3,000 people. And all the time, he is pressing on with synchronizing sound with film projection. And here's Stanley on the right-hand side of that camera. You can see with NBC there. And on the right, there is a poster of Al Jolson with the jazz singer. Now, what had happened before the jazz singer was released was that films, of course, were silent. Any sound was coming from a live orchestra or an organ being played, or a piano perhaps being played. And some of the bigger cinemas had really large orchestras. So that was how they provided some kind of sound for it. So what Stanley did was he persuaded Sam Warner of the three Warner brothers to lease the Manhattan Opera House for showing sound movies, and they were going to record these movies. They were going to record this sound. They had a problem because at the time, the metro in New York was being dug underneath, and there was huge troubles for Stan Watkins to actually provide soundproofing in any building, especially somewhere as large as the Metropolitan Opera House. So they put stage flats against the walls. They had cloths hanging up to keep the sound out as much as possible. They actually solved it by having the camera and the sound um, recording actually in a sort of a sealed box in which the operator would get into this sealed box. And so the first actual movie that they made with recorded sound was the movie called Don Juan. And here is they did it with the Vitaphone. That was the process that Stan Watkins invented with the Vitaphone. And whilst the film was being played, the recording played, but it wasn't vital that the orchestral sound that was coming from the recording actually harmonized exactly with the film. It wasn't so important. It wasn't until we got to where we get to the jazz singer that it was vital. So here you can see the opening of Don Juan at the Warner's Theatre on the left, and the advert again on the right for Vitaphone. And in 1929, it was the first Oscar ceremony. And because Warner Brothers, with the help of Stan Watkins, had cracked the idea of the science of producing sound movies, they were given a special Oscar at the ceremony. And it revolutionized the actual provision of sound with movies. Now, the other big companies thought this was going to be a real failure. They actually hoped it was going to be a real failure because they had invested heavily in paying and providing orchestras for the big cinemas. And also, of course, they realized that they were going to get charged for the actual patent, the license from Warner Brothers to show sound movies in their cinemas. But once the actual jazz singer went on screen, as we're going to see now, that was it.
You like that, Mama? I'm glad of it. I'd rather please you than anybody I know of. Oh, and darling, will you give me something? You'll never guess. Shut your eyes, Mama. Shut up for little Jackie. Oh, I'm going to steal something. I'll give it back to you someday, too. You see if I don't. Mama, darling, if I'm a...
Well, what you saw there was the first talkie. That was the first talkie. And Al Jolson did that unscripted. Al Jolson was a vaudeville performer. He liked to have a live audience, and he felt he was very stiff when he was actually making those silent movies, or when he's done some before. And so when he did his song, he then ad libs. So what you're seeing is when he's having a chat with his scream mother, that was actually ad libbing. Warner Brothers were so pleased, and Stan Watkins was so pleased, they decided to leave that in. And that's the first that people actually heard of sound movies. And in recognition to Stan's work, he went on, by the way, to put sound systems in many, many American cinemas, and then came over to the UK and worked in the sound ones in England at Pinewood rather. And there's also a plaque to him there, and also at Leicester Square. And that's your local cinema. And so this was the Odeon East Dulwich. In those days, it was called the Pavilion East Dulwich. It was actually built in about, I think, 1929, but it was actually on the site of Imperial Hall, where they did show movies, but before that, it was a lecture hall. So the first great star that was born in Dulwich was Leslie Howard. Leslie Howard was he grew up in Forest Hill, and very young, I think he was 4. His parents moved him to Austria, and he was there 2 years. And when he came back to London and moved actually into Farquhar Road, well, I think actually, first of all, he moved into Jasper Road. When he moved into Jasper Road, he didn't speak any English. His parents were German Jewish, and he had his mother and his aunts were also living round the corner in Farquhar Road. So he was very interested in acting. He was very interested in writing. He had his own little theatre in his sort of box room up in the top of the house. He produced 2 plays, and he even advertised those plays. You know, this was by his name before he became Leslie Howard. It was his German one, which was Leslie Steiner. And so it was Leslie Steiner of Allendale, Jasper Road. That was his address, honorary secretary of the Upper Norwood Dramatic Society. And that was his first play. And there was a second play that he wrote that was produced down at the Stanley Halls on South Norwood Hill. Well, I don't think he excelled himself very much at Dulwich College. His father was getting a bit anxious and said, you know, why don't you get a proper job? And so he became a bank clerk at the age of 19. Just about 2 or 3 years later, the war broke out, World War One, and he enlisted in 1914 into he went to the recruiting depot of the Artist Rifles and did a selection course for going into officer school, and was commissioned into the Northamptonshire Yeomanry. And in a very short time, he was doing training in the Colchester area. He met a lady there that suggested to him that he should do more about acting. But anyway, he was very busy in the army, and he goes with the regiment over to France. and I think he probably does a year, maybe nearly 2 years as a subaltern in the cavalry, or dismounted cavalry now, in the World War One, in northern France and Belgium. And he was discharged with shell shock and a severe case. And when he came back, he was discharged, and he was given advice to take up acting as a therapy. And that's when his professional career actually started. And he was a great success. Um, he went out to Hollywood. He was spotted and got parts, and also was a very clever director. Here he is with Merle Oberon, and here with Maureen O'Sullivan, where he's in Gone with the Wind. And there is the plaque, which is up to Leslie Howard, which is actually in Farkhill Road, because when he was living at the house in Allendale Road, that house was bombed. And his family, his mother and his sister, moved into Farkhill Road, and so Leslie Howard went there as well. Oh, can we go back one? Sorry. Yeah, yeah. Okay. He had a rather sad ending, which we will discover in a moment. Because he's making films during the war, for the British war effort. So the next person we want to look at is Ray Milland, and you may have heard vaguely of Ray Milland and probably thought, what connection has Ray Milland got to do with Dulwich? Well, Ray Milland was born in Wales and worked on his uncle's horse farm, did a bit of mining, and then joined the army. He joined the Royal Horse Guards, and he was a crack shot. He was the British Army crack shot on the rifle and the revolver at Bisley. He was also an accomplished horseman, which was just as well. He was in the Horse Guards, but of course he did learn that at his uncle's horse farm in Wales. And the other thing was he became a pilot. So he did all these things. He also got a bit disillusioned, and he decided he was going to chance his luck in Hollywood. And he also met a young lady, and they married, and they went to Hollywood. And he was out of work because it was the time of the Depression. And he got a flat, first of all, just off of Sunset Boulevard. And he got a job during the Depression of the 30s, the early 30s, working in a garage on Sunset Boulevard. And one day, this was one of the great bits of luck, a spotter, as they're called. I think they probably have them talent spotters for football teams, but then they had talent spotters for studios. Perhaps they've got them now. Well, this talent spotter worked for Paramount, spotted Ray Milland, who was this manager or assistant manager at this garage on Sunset Boulevard, and said, why don't you come with me and take a screen test, because the actor that was doing this part has broken his leg. And that was his bit of luck. And so Ray Milland had the start of a very, very long and successful career, and wins the Best Actor Oscar for Lost Weekend. Another person that grew up in Dulwich, and this one was born in he was born in 1887 and lived in Forest Hill Road, and that was almost opposite Peckham Park. And that was not his name. he acquired the name Boris Karloff later on. He also decided he was going to try his luck abroad. Um, and he went to Canada, and he was a lumberjack. He worked on a ranch, and he ended up down in 1919 working down in Hollywood as a bit player in those days of the silent movies. And he adopted the name of Boris Karloff, but it wasn't until he actually discovered Hammer films that he became hugely popular because he created the role of Frankenstein. And as you can see, he appeared in 174 films in that 50-year period, from horror movies, which he was the most famous for. But in the end, he was the guy that did the narration for How the Grinch Stole Christmas. And there you can see he lived his youth in Forest Hill Road. Rosamund John, here and in the picture with David Niven in the first of the few, was she went to stage school. Uh, she was also spotted. She was spotted by Robert Donat. In fact, Robert Donat fell in love with her. Didn't come to anything, but he certainly made sure that Rosamund John's path to success was a bit easier. And in fact, when Rosamund John was picking cherries in Robert Donat's garden, it was there that an agent spotted Rosamund John and recommended her for a part in the first of the few. And the first of the few was actually directed by uh, the, the Leslie Howard, sorry. So here is Leslie Howard with Rosamund John in the first of the few. Um, after this film, he's still working with Rosamund John, and Leslie Howard is persuaded by the British Council to go to Lisbon to work for promoting some of the British cinema in Portugal. Now, at the time, Winston Churchill had gone over to North Africa for the summit, which was arranged to plan for the Allied landings in North Africa. And Winston Churchill was to make his way back to England by plane, roughly the same time that Leslie Howard was going back to continue making the first of the few. And it's said that a German agent saw Leslie Howard getting on a plane, rather muffled up, presumably, was convinced that was Winston Churchill, and sent that back quickly to German intelligence. And 8 Messerschmitts attacked the airliner that was flying from Lisbon to England, which had Leslie Howard on, who was thought to be Winston Churchill, which of course he wasn't. It was shot down, and Leslie Howard and everybody was killed. But there was some inquiry afterwards, and German intelligence said that not true at all. What happened was that those 8 Messerschmitts were actually shepherding 2 U-boats back towards the German ports, and saw this airliner, which was not a neutral airliner, and felt it was right they were allowed to shoot it down. So unfortunately, Leslie Howard was killed in 1943. So Rosamund John continued being a hugely successful actress right up until the 1950s. But she was also an extremely active Labour Party member and trade unionist. The most unlikely lady when you saw those pictures, and if you've ever seen her in films, um, she was the one that wanted to make sure that all the actors were paid the equity rate, that uh, things were followed correctly. You know, she agitated for them all. She married the Labour politician John Silkin there in 1950, and they lived in Alleyne Park. Another person living in Alleyne Park was David Farrar, and David Farrar um, was generally, I think, a little bit a disappointed actor. He never made the big time, not to the very end. He always got um, he didn't think he got the best parts. He was always toing and froing between England and Hollywood, and he had a house in Alleyne Park. Another one it was very close to Rosamund John when she was in Alleyne Park. And so he's here with his daughter Barbara, and two Dulwich Society members, when they were very, very young, um, were invited by Mrs. Farrar to go and play with Barbara, David Farrar's daughter, because she wasn't allowed to go to school. She was home taught. She was very young, but Mrs. Farrar wanted her to have some friends that made life a little bit more normal. Um, and the two girls, one is Jill Baird, and that name some of you may remember. Jill Baird recalls that David Farrar had a full-size tennis court in his garden in Alleyne Park, roughly the place where Rouse Gardens stands today. That's all been, of course, rebuilt. And Barbara Farrar had a little theatre in the basement of the house and would put on plays, and Jill Baird would act in those plays as well. And so that was as much as a normal life that Barbara Farrar could get. Um, well, ultimately, David Farrar was fed up with getting parts that he thought were not suitable for him. He said, "I'm really tired of not of being cast with the uncle or the father-in-law rather than the young man." So aging he didn't suit David Farrar at all, I'm afraid. Now Barbara went with his mother and father. They actually went to live when they moved from Alleyne Park. They went to Africa, and when they were in Africa, Barbara posed for Tretyakov, uh, more famous. The artist, of course, is more famous for the Chinese girl on the left, but the one of Barbara Lane, as she was in a married name, in 1976 is on the right there. And Tretyakov gave Barbara uh, a copy, and that's the copy was on an oil board, and the original, of course, is in I think it's Swaziland. Uh, very fairly recently, a Tretyakov changed hands for £1 million. So it was an interesting meeting between the two. A surprise actor who grew up in Dulwich was Roddy McDowall. As a child actor, he was born in 204 Herne Hill, and his mother was really very keen. He made sure he went for every audition he possibly could. He was really good at it, and the family moved over to Hollywood in 1939, and there he starred in Planet of the Apes. And of course, before he actually went, he made How Green Was My Valley when he was a child, and he played Octavian and so on. There was one more thing about Roddy McDowall. Sorry, can we go back one more? Sorry. Thank you. He also was a member of the Board of Academy of Motion Pictures and the selection committee for the Kennedy Center Honors. Now, that's why I wanted to look at this one, because Michael Crawford has recently had his portrait chosen by President Trump to go in the Kennedy Gallery of Honors. So here we've got Michael Crawford. Typically some mothers do have them sort of posed. Now Michael had a pretty rough upbringing. His father was killed in 1940 in World War II. His mother had a brief affair with someone which Michael was the result of, and then she married a grocer and moved with Michael and her mother. First of all, they were on the Isle of Sheppey, and then he got a job with David Greggs. The husband got a job with David Greggs. At first, at Bexley Heath. So he went to Michael went to Bexley Heath and joined the choir there. His mother was extremely insistent that he learnt to sing, so he was in the choir there. And then the husband got promotion and was made the manager of David Greggs at Herne Hill in Half Moon Lane, 2 down from the Half Moon pub. And they're in the flat above, and Michael is sent to Oakfield School. And he goes to Oakfield School in the junior department of Oakfield School, and all that training he'd done, and he not only sung at Bexley Heath, but he also sang for the London choir, and so when the music teacher at Oakfield suggested that they did one of Benjamin Britten's pieces, Let's Make an Opera, Michael Crawford gets part of Sooty the Sweep. And he gets, of course, typical Michael Crawford gets stuck up the chimney, literally, and they try to pull him down the chimney and his trousers come off. And so his part in the school play, although he was only 10, was quite hilarious. Anyway, he goes then into the upper school, and he's getting a bit fed up with it by the time he's 15, and he decides he wants to break away. And his neighbour, Mrs. Gray, by this time his stepfather had got promoted again and was promoted to the David Greggs shop at Brixton, and they decided to move to Winterbrook Road. So they moved into Winterbrook Road when I think that Michael was about 10 or 11. And whilst they were there, and when Michael was about 15, the neighbour, Mrs. Gray, spoke to Michael Crawford's mother and said, really, Michael, I've seen this advertisement for a Benjamin Britten touring opera company, and I think that Michael would be really good in that. Well, Michael Crawford's mother promptly sends Michael off to the audition. He gets the part. He gets a joint part. David Hemmings gets half the role, and Michael gets the other half. Anyway, they go on a tour with Let's Make an Opera. But then he gets spotted, and TV comes with, obviously, some mothers do have them. And then, of course, the great success in Hollywood with Hello, Dolly. And there you can see on the left, Michael accepting the award of President Trump's nomination for the Kennedy Center. On the left, on the right, he's got the mask from the Phantom of the Opera, which It's Donald Trump's favorite piece of entertainment, and that won Michael that role there. Another well-known actor that grew up in Dulwich was Peter Cushing, who grew up in Desmond Road. He was very young. He went to kindergarten, was actually in played the hobgoblin in the play at primary school or at nursery school, but soon the family moved to Purley, and he goes down to Purley and he gets a place at Purley Grammar School, and he's really only interested in acting, and he's really keen on it, as Michael Crawford was. You know, they were both dedicated towards it. In fact, all these people we've seen so far have all been absolutely dedicated. This is what they want to do. That the sound of laughter from an audience was the switch on moment for many of them. So Peter Cushing wanted to go into acting. His father was an architect and said, "No, I think you should go to the borough surveyor's office and become a draftsman." Well, he stood that for 2 or 3 years, and then he wrote 21 letters to the Guildhall School of Speech and Drama. And the last letter apparently must have swung it, because he got a place, he got a scholarship to the Guildhall, and that was the start for Peter. And he um, he went also to Hollywood. Uh, he hadn't got a clue. He'd learned at the Guildhall School of Speech and Drama all sorts of things, but he hadn't thought about sword fencing. And the first part he got auditioned for and got was The Man in the Iron Mask, which required a fair amount of sword fencing. Anyway, he survived that. He then became very famous for playing Sherlock Holmes, and then he also stumbles on Hammer pictures, rather like Boris Karloff switched on to him, onto horror pictures. And Peter Cushing was not only in the Frankenstein, but also, of course, was in the Dracula films, often sharing stage with um, uh, Lee, and I can't remember his first name, and you will, I know. No, he was able to switch off. He was a very keen watercolorist, and these are a couple of his examples of his work here. But also, he was a keen bird watcher, and he was a keen naturalist. And he said, people think I'm either a monster or a monster killer, but really I'm a very harmless person. And that probably does sum up his life. And now we've got to more recent times, not that so recent, but we've got Anna Carteret here, and there's her daughter, Hattie, who's also an actress. Anna Carteret was actually under Olivier's wing at the Old Vic and had a long and distinguished theatrical career, but she's better known for most of Dulwich people as her role as the Inspector Longden in the police dramas. She was married to Christopher Morahan, who died sadly in 2017. And Christopher, he was also his father was in the movie business. He tried going into acting, and he went on a tour with Orson Welles, and he was I think he abandoned acting after going on this tour with Orson Welles and took up film directing, and he became extremely successful film producer and director. His most famous work, of course, is The Jewel in the Crown, the 14-part TV drama which won the BAFTA, and which he was the co-director and producer. Now, why I show the Dulwich High School for Girls picture, which you may recognize vaguely this picture, it is actually Rosemead School now, this is a very old print, was that Christopher Morahan actually went to that school, not to the girls' school, because during the war that the school had closed, it became used for the storage of furniture. And then in 1946, I think it was, three distinguished directors, Michael Sandeni, George Devine, and there's one more we're going to see Gwen Bingham Shaw. They actually decided they were going to lease that school we just looked at, which is now Rosemead School, and they would actually open up the Old Vic Theatre School there. And they ran that school from, I think it was 1946 to about 1952. And at a time, about 120 students between the ages of 18 and 20 will go through that school in the course of a year. Now, these were really important directors and teachers at the school. So Michael Sandeni, his father, his uncle was a distinguished director in France and was interested in Greek drama. Now, what Michael did was to sort of strip the stage of all scenery as much as possible, and so it was the actors that were going to perform there. The Bingham Shaw went to become the director of the Shakespeare Memorial Theatre. George Devine here went into, apart from directing, he was in acting. Here he is with Alec Guinness. So they, between the three of them, ran that theatre school. And here's one of the early pupils at the school. There is the school itself now tarted up a bit, as you can see. Prunella Scales was one of those actresses that actually studied there in she was there, as you can see, in 1951, and moved on. And then she obviously was she was Mrs. Fortey's wife in Fortey Towers, and she came along to the unveiling of the Dulwich statue for Edward Alleyne in the old college grounds, and there she is with Tessa Jow at the unveiling. The other great influence in this period was Michael Crawford, and as I said earlier, he founded the National Youth Theatre in 1956. It was boys from Alleyne School that were really enthused by Michael Crawford's direction as drama teacher that persuaded him to launch the National Youth Theatre. And Michael Crawford's book called Spare the Rod was released as a film. And then in 2010, the Michael Crawford Theatre, it's called the MCT, was opened at Alleyne School. We've got another BAFTA winner, still living in Dulwich, actually living in Eastlands Crescent. That's Vera Lineker, age 103, and she won the BAFTA winner for animation. It was 1966, and it was a training film called "Do Be Careful, Boys." It was to teach apprentices to be very, very careful with handling tools and machinery, and it was hilarious. It was set to an operetta. Another jobbing actor that worked for was in the business for 50 years was John Marino. John played all kinds of parts. He was here in the Bond film For Your Eyes Only with come to me in a moment. Anyway, John was also a coach for stage fights. He was a drama coach, stage player, bit player, and did everything. Another character, very interesting character, was John Heller. John always played the part of the haughty German uh, officer. Actually, John was born in Czechoslovakia, and it doesn't matter how sort of villainous he looks here. He works helps his wife, who ran a boutique in Dulwich Village in the 80s, and he was an absolute hoot. And here he is. He was never unemployed. He made hundreds of films, all in parts like this, which was character acting. And he was even in Kelly's Heroes. Another police part is Trudy Goodwin, who was Sergeant Ackland, and she played the role all from 1983 to 2007 and made her the world's longest serving police character in the bill, which she every day she would go to Merton, to the studios over at Merton, to make this film. Oliver Cotton, actor, writer, um, his plays, Scrabble, Daytona, regularly produced. He wrote for Touch of Frost, and also I think he wrote for. Doesn't matter what he wrote for, but there we go. So I'm rushing through because I realize I'm rather late. We mustn't forget Susanna Harker. Susanna was Maddie in House of Cards, and she was nominated for a BAFTA. And here she is with uh, Ian Richardson just before they go up onto the roof of the House of Commons, where Ian Richardson, in the role of the Prime Minister, throws poor Susanna Harker, Matty, over the roof of the top of the House of Commons. Over on the left-hand picture, here she is as Jane Bennet in Pride and Prejudice. Pip Torrens is always busy, character actor. He likes to sort of offer himself as military or clerical. And so here on the left, that's the picture of him as the judge in Mr. Bates. But he's always taking a role of a figure of authority. Say, for example, John Scarlett, for example, in the TV inquiry into the MI5, the death of the MI5 officer several years ago. We're delighted that Ian Glenn is among us, and Ian has done, I think he's been in 59 episodes of Game of Thrones, a whole catalogue of films. Born in Scotland, came down, went to drama school, went through the hard way. He was in Downton, as you can see here. I'm told he was, not he himself, but the character he played was the most unloved character in Downton Abbey. James Nesbitt had two sort of there was two parts of James Nesbitt's character. The first bit on the left was his, happy-go-lucky guy. Before 2000, he was the face of Yellow Pages, or the face of Thomas Cook, and many of the films that he made were sort of tongue-in-cheek. The one that made him very successful was the one that he made about the Irish tenor, and I haven't got my note handy, but "Hear My Song" was the name of the film, and it was such a memorable role that he took. It wasn't a huge part. He was the agent for the Joseph Locke was the name of the singer. Um, that it was memorable, and it led to many other roles. Now, in the early 2000s, he starts to get interested in drama of a more serious kind, especially Northern Irish drama to do with the Troubles or with the police. And so he is frequently seen as a villain, sorry, not a villain, but rather a harder character than the easygo James Nesbitt that was a great helper at Dulwich Hamlet School PTA just very recently. Julian Glover was at Allains, was one of those that went straight from Allains to got a place at RADA, then went into the army, then started that long haul of career with a huge volume of work. I think his first film was something like 1968, and his most recent film was actually this year. And here, can we go back one? Thank you. And at the top there, I think he was there in the Roger Moore film, one of the Bond films, and he's the villain. And that was the film where the John Marino I showed you, who was playing the part of Luigi Ferrara, was actually killed, and so his name is sort of Crystalus. He was the Greek shipping magnate who was the villain of the piece. And here is Julian Glover unveiling the statue to Edward Alleyne in over by the chapel in 2006. A good friend of mine is David Weston. On the right there was his great role, one of his great roles really, was when he played the part of the young monk in Becket with Peter opposite Peter O'Toole. And then on the left there, he's receiving the Theatre Book of the Year from Zoe Wanamaker for his book Covering MacLellan, an understudy's tale. And it tells the story of poor David understudying MacLellan for MacLellan's 1 year world tour with Lear, and MacLellan was never off stage. So David was sitting in the wings for a whole year, but the book won the theatre prize of the year. And he followed it up with this one, covering Shakespeare, an actor's saga of near misses and dogged endurance. Do read the book. And so a handful of Alleyne's actors you might have seen and didn't realize they went to Alleyne's. John Stride, and there is John Stride again, and he's with Judi Dench in 1961 as Romeo, and he's playing Romeo against her Juliet, and nominated as the Academy's Best Picture Award, the last Shakespearean picture film to be so nominated. Simon Ward, famous of course for playing the part of young Winston, did a lot of TV afterwards, moved to the National Youth Theatre at the age of 14. Sam West, who we see regularly now, and of course Jude Law. Neither of them live in Dulwich, but I thought I should put them in. And here, Dulwich College, mustn't forget Bob Monkhouse on the left and Chitwell Ejiofor on the right. And Chitwell had, of course, was nominated for an Oscar for his work. And here we quickly got the critics. Sheridan Morley did In Peckham's Wood and was a writer. He wrote the play Noel and Gertie, which was Noel Coward and Gertie Lawrence. He was a film critic, writer, journalist. And we move on now to the censor, John Trevelyan. He gets a bit of a hard press, but he was a very thorough man. Even Monty Python rather played a trick on him a bit, because the statue in the Monty Python sketch, there was a statue of David with a fig leaf in the essential part of his anatomy. And when the fig leaf is removed, there's a picture there of John Trevelyan, and sort of with a little quote about it, we haven't all got dirty minds or something like that. And here we end our last character this evening. We do have a sort of another superstar still living in Dulwich, apart from those I've already mentioned, Jason Statham. To my surprise, I see he represented Great Britain in the 1990 Commonwealth Games and has a black belt for karate. And I'm amazed at his 27 years. He's also been at the coalface, as many of those people have we've been watching this evening. They've all had a hard time. It has never been easy. Some of the women actors find it difficult to continue to get roles. The men still struggle. It is a hard life to continually move. It is very disrupting, but we are grateful to them for the work they've done and the pleasure that they have given us. So thank you very much. I'm sorry I've exceeded my time, but give us the movie. We can make that move. You see, we've got all the action here. And thank you very much indeed. I'm over to Sharon now. Thank you.